So first of all, with my thanks to the organizer with such a wonderful space dialogue that has been going on for the past 2 days now. We put forward to you a wonderful panel which is going to talk about the changing space environment. Now, space belongs to all humanity, and just a few decades back, it was totally owned by the government agencies. It was in the domain of government agencies, and since the shift has been so prominent now that the new space players are dominating the scene in space. And from few decades back, when there were almost 100% satellites, microsatellites, all owned by government agencies, the new space players are now creating new jobs, new technologies, new possibilities in the regime of new space. I have a wonderful panel of glittering stars who have done so good in their field. We would be looking forward to a few questions. What is the future? What are the possibilities? Will the present law structure and the policies will be able to govern and create a synergy between the new space needs and demands? Will the manufacturing meet? What is the role of India, and where is India heading in all of this? This is a wonderful panel here. So, without any delay, I think I'll invite up our first speaker. She is Bidushi Bhattacharya. She is Chief Executive Officer of Astropreneurs Hub. Dr. Bidushi Bhattacharya is a rocket scientist and entrepreneur with more than 28 years of experience in spacecraft development and operations, academic administration, and space research. She has founded a number of space-related companies in Singapore, including Astropreneur Hub, Southeast Asia's first space technology incubator, and Bhattacharya Space Enterprise, a startup dedicated to space-related education and training. Bidushi has worked on the Hubble Space Telescope, Mars rover program, and other planetary spacecrafts and space-based observatories. She has also established science research development program at various colleges in US. So my first speaker, Bidushi Bhattacharya.
All right, while we're getting the slides organized and everybody's getting their tea and coffee, let me just get a sense of the audience. How many people here are interested in space entrepreneurship or are currently entrepreneurs themselves? Okay, so maybe 20% of the group. So are you going to advance the slides for me? Is there a slide advancer? All right, so what I want to do today is just give you a sense of the space entrepreneurship or astropreneurship scene globally and here locally in India as well, and then think about some steps that we might take to build the ecosystem. Which one is it? Okay. All right, so when you think about commercial space, we often refer to it as big space. Now, for most of my career, I worked on multi-billion-dollar projects like the Hubble Space Telescope. On your top left there, you see a group that worked on the Hubble Space Telescope. My first job out of college, we had 400-some people there, and we were one of dozens of centers that worked on the Hubble. And that was a $2 billion project, plus more money was thrown at it after they had issues with the mirror. You can also look at missions like the Mars Pathfinder program, another several $billion dollars, Galileo at Jupiter. These are some of my favorite programs. I did my PhD with Galileo. And again, these took years to develop. And by the time the technology was launched, it did some pretty fantastic things, but it was very old. One of my jobs on the Hubble was to be in charge of the dead diode table for one of the spectrographs. The thing had been sitting on the ground for so long. By the time we launched it, remember, it was supposed to go up after the Challenger, which exploded, so they mothballed it for a couple years. We would turn it on, see if it worked. Some things did, some things didn't, and the calibrations actually had to extend across all those broken channels. So if you look more recently at the Mangalyaan mission, for example, costs have dropped substantially. Earlier this week at the World Government Summit, Modi talked about the mission and how we all know it cost about as much as a Hollywood movie. So yes, you've dropped costs by at least a couple orders of magnitude in comparison to what you did in the past, but we're at this very interesting stage right now in terms of technology development and just a mindset. So we talk about commercial space being new space, put together as one word. And the reason new space is so important, and the reason we're so effective in this domain at this point, is we've got disruption. If you're not familiar with it already, in this person's hand here is a CubeSat. So you look at your phone. A lot of you guys have your phones out right now. The phone is a miniature computer, right? And decades ago, it would have been the size of one of these tables, if not larger. So satellites similarly have shrunk in size. And if you're in the industry, you know that there are specs. They have to weigh 1.1 kilogram for the base unit. And these things can be developed to fly independently. And you can do a very basic unit, including launch, particularly if you go with ISRO, for $250,000 to $300,000, including labor, which is pretty phenomenal. At 1/1000th the cost, you can take more chances, you can do rapid development, you can go in and put something together fairly quickly. Companies are doing this in a standardized way as rapidly as 8 to 12 weeks. And you can put the latest and greatest sensors on board. And you can also just say, I'm going to put up 10 of them. If 2 don't work, I still have 8 that do. 20% success rate or failure rate is actually acceptable. So what does this mean for us? There are so many opportunities out there right now. If you look around, if you're in the biz, you know there are about 1,500 startups in space tech globally at this point. 15 of those that we know of are here in India. So I see a lot of the players here. If there are any more that we don't know about, let us know. We've got a database. It's basically a spreadsheet that a group of us are putting together. 15 is not a big number. We're definitely hoping to expand that. At this point, the easiest place to get your foot in the door is through education. Everybody's interested in space. Space is part of the national identity here. Education and training seems to be an important way that we can get the whole process started. And then we all know about some of the other things Tim and us with the moon lander. There's also some stuff going on with data. I think we'll hear more about this from some of the other teams later. Virtual reality, augmented reality are other real growth areas, especially as we try to talk about doing things. I mean, everything from robotic surgery like we were talking about to just simulating life on a space station or Mars. There's a lot of opportunity there as well. Asteroid mining, that's probably one of my favorite areas. And people who don't do space look at you like you're crazy, but we all know the government of Luxembourg has contributed $1.2 billion to the development of asteroid mining. It's very lucrative, right? Some of these rocks out there are worth trillions of dollars, and whoever gets there first will do very well. And it's still kind of the Wild West in terms of space policy and space law, so I'm sure that's one of the areas people here are interested in looking at. And in-orbit manufacturing, we talked about using regolith to do manufacturing in space. That's important. You can also do things like pharmaceutical development. There are molecules that we can all model here on the Earth on a computer, but you can't design them here because the pull of gravity is so strong, and these are quite tenuous structures. If you put yourself in space, you can develop the base for these and study them a bit further. So if you look at the dawn of the entrepreneurial space race, there's a group called Space Angels Investments that puts out these really handy quarterly reports. If you're interested, let me know, and I'll give you the link later. But you can see between 2009 and today, the cumulative investment in commercial space, this is not on the government side, the commercial space has been close to $30 billion. And of that, $300 billion has been just in the past year. And that you can tell by the graph, that's a very steep slope. We're only growing, and we're going to continue to grow even faster. So what are we doing to build this ecosystem? We are based in Singapore, and we based there because, first of all, it's very easy to set up a business, and it's very easy to have global reach from there. So we are doing projects such as on your left, you've got the little box with a ruler on it. That is a 10 centimeter by 4 by 4 centimeters. That's a cube we use to do student experiments on board the International Space Station. Students will design these and actually deploy them, and for something like $55,000 US, you can get an astronaut's time, you can get a launch, you can get data from your experiment, and you can have it brought back down to study afterwards. And I mean, to me, that's crazy. When I was in high school, I can't have imagined, or as a university student, having an opportunity like this. But since they have provided commercial platforms on the space station to whoever wants to be able to set up a block up there for doing research. This is just accessible. And we have groups from Singapore and Australia to date that have done this, and we're also looking to set this up for schools in India. And then, of course, CubeSats. Those are very easy to get these days, off-the-shelf technology. If you're willing to build a desktop model that actually doesn't fly, you can actually use it as a very effective training platform. And one of the things we do is we have students take these and layer by layer assemble them while we discuss space systems. And the goal there is to take this big mysterious thing called space tech and actually make it tangible and accessible. There's nothing like holding a piece of hardware in your hands, plugging it into your laptop, typing in some basic scripts to turn it on and to take a selfie with it to really make you engage with space tech. And we do this workshop as well. And I think that there's going to be more and more of a trend of adding sophistication to these kinds of platforms. And there was a comment made earlier about launching from India and how much it costs to do in-house manufacturing here. We actually had to order our parts from China for this, but I'm thinking one of the things we really do want to do is build the ecosystem so we can build locally, so we can really make in India, make in India. And then, of course, we talk about just building the industry and doing space exploration as a whole. So we have an incubator that's set up in Singapore. And I don't have it on the view graph, but we have a couple MOUs in place with incubators in Australia, the US, and we're trying to reach out to Europe as well to set up this network of space startups so that we can exchange information on a global scale. Specialists exist in different parts of the world, and somebody needs to bring them all together. And I think the biggest resource we can provide to our startups is a community for them to go in and brainstorm. They can come up with an idea. They may change their mind the following week. That doesn't matter as long as they're thinking and ideating. And so our program is designed to go through this 4-year process. It's 4 years, not just going to be 10 weeks. So we've got this initial program called the Lean Launchpad program. If you know anything about business, MBA, all of you MBA types probably are familiar with this. We used to do a 10-week program to help people come up with a business model so you actually identify commercializable tech. And then we have a couple of phases where we help you launch the prototype. So I'll just go through this very quickly in the interest of time. So for the first part, you do business model development, and you do a global class, and we've got instructors who help you identify a minimum viable product. So if everybody who wants to do space tech came to me and said, let's build it, from the standpoint of technology, I'd say that sounds really cool, let's do it. But the issue is, how do you commercialize that? How do you actually get it to be something that's marketable where people will invest? And we also have people validate their business model. And this is a bit tricky because the customers we are building for don't exist yet, right? We're growing an economy, we're growing an ecosystem, and we just kind of have a sense of what will be required, but those kind of customers aren't out there already in space. But by the time they launch, by the time they have their needs, somebody's going to have to be there. And my thinking is that workforce, that STEM knowledgeable group of young people has to come from Asia. To date, it's been in North America and Europe, which is great, but you've got, 4 billion people out here who are interested in space tech. We need to figure out how to engage them. So the next phase is going to be proof of concept. And what we will do there is, I want everybody's space tech to actually launch. Having it sit in a clean room on a lab bench, that's nice. You've got something that's been tested. Maybe you've done environmental testing, but if you've been in the business for a while, you know that microgravity and just the launch process are always game changers. No matter how much you test stuff, you have to recalibrate when you get up there. So we want to take our startups, and after they've done the validated business model, help them to develop a payload for the International Space Station. And the particulars will depend on the tech itself, internal versus external. But we want to launch them in the same way that we launch our student experiments on a more sophisticated platform so that they can get flight validation. And that's huge, right? Because once you have flight heritage, you are perceived to be significantly less risky by investors, and it's much more comfortable for them to come in. You've flown, you know what works, you know what doesn't, and at that point, you're ready to accelerate your project progress much more quickly. The other thing that's really important about getting yourself up there is, that's a bottleneck, right? It's very hard to figure out the launch process for a startup. So if you've got a team of 4 or 5 young people, they're really brilliant, they've got some tech, how are they going to get it up there? They don't know how to license. They don't know about the different pathways and the different partnerships they can set up. And if you come in just brand new, you're in the queue. Whereas if you come in with an established group that has relationships with the launch partners, then you can get yourself into the system and get yourself up into space much more effectively. So the final phase of this is going to be our final proof of value step, which is going to be actually launching your prototype onto a CubeSat or whatever independently flying platform that you need, depending on exactly what the tech is. And so this final part will take another 2 years. So I had said 4 years in total. So we do 10 weeks for this business model development, another couple years to get your prototype onto the space station, and then another couple years to get yourself, after you've been funded a bit more, to get yourself to the point where you are independently flying in space. So that's the basic idea, and the motivating factor behind this for us is making life better here on planet Earth. And you may be familiar with this image. This is a refugee, a Syrian refugee, and she's protecting her child here with a space blanket. This is a Mylar blanket, the same that's used on the outside of spacecraft for thermal management, and somebody figured out that these incredibly cheap, incredibly thin blankets can be used for humans. If you've ever bought one of these, you can go on Amazon and you can get 10 of them for $10. It's crazy. If you ever bought one and you just put it over your hand, you'll start to feel your hand getting hot within 30 seconds. It's just amazing material. And it's also used in the commercial sector for balloons and whatnot, but it was developed for space. So that's a great example of how you take tech for space and bring it down to Earth. And then, of course, you can go the other way, where this is a disastrous hurricane that was off the coast of Florida earlier late last year, and this hurricane was observed from space, and we were able to evacuate, 3 million people, I think it was, because there was timely data available on a regular basis to understand its trajectory. So that's about all I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Bidushi, for a wonderful presentation. I think, after Dr. Pillai's presentation, this is again an grasping presentation, and many of you want to ask many questions. But keeping in mind the time we have, I would invite my next speaker. He's Gadadhar Reddy, founder and CEO of Nopo Technologies. Oh, I'm sorry. So, I would now like to invite, since Gadadhar is not here, I would like to invite Neha Satak. She is co-founder and CEO at Astrome Technologies. Ms. Neha Satak is the CEO of Astrome Technologies Private Limited. She's a serial entrepreneur and researcher. Her PhD dissertation on behavior learning in game theory received interest from Air Force Research Lab, AFRL, USA. Following which, she worked with AFRL as a postdoctoral research associate through University of Florida. She has worked exclusively for various aspects relating to manned and unmanned micro-aerial vehicles. Neha Satak.
Hi, good morning. I think till the presentation comes up, I'll just give a brief introduction about my company, Astrome. We are a space technology company who is making satellite internet more affordable, especially for the developing countries, with our technology. So with that in background, I thought, because this panel is all about talking about changes that are happening in the space industry, I thought, why not talk about the communication satellite industry where my company is working in. So if you look at trends in terms of what has been happening with communication satellites previously and what is the future, what you will see is that in the past, the communication satellite industry was dominated by broadcasting satellites, and these were big satellites, ton-class satellites, very large satellites, most of them placed in geostationary orbits, and they were designed to last for many, many years, 25 years or even more. The next thing is that because of the kind of satellites that were to be made and the cost of making those satellites, the services that came out of those satellites were very expensive. Hence, it was not. It is not like basically available for the masses to customize the services. So that is the probably also the current scenario, even though there are a lot of companies who are coming in and making it more affordable, but it has not yet happened up to the point that we can say that it is available to the masses. And of course, the whole arena is dominated by few private companies and mostly by the government. So the satellites are mostly owned by the government or a few private companies. Now, what we are seeing in the future, what we will, we can expect in the future is that instead of broadcasting, which is only basically a satellite just, downloading data with very little capacity to upload data, we are going into a generation where internet satellites are coming up, where the download speeds and the upload speeds are comparable. So that is one change that is, happening. Moreover, the ton class satellites are now translating into micro satellite and small satellite. So from a satellite that was weighing 1000 kg is now packed in a smaller form factor of 100 kgs to 500 kgs. Also, we are moving away from geo orbits, not moving away, but we are also exploring LEO and MEO orbits, which are much closer to Earth. Because for two-way communication, you do need that kind of latency, which geostationary satellites cannot provide. And then the next change that is happening is, instead of designing satellites which last for 25 years, we are looking at companies who are designing satellites to last for 5 years or 10 years. And in terms of university satellite, they are even designed to last for 6 months or a year. And then because of this, the trend that is happening in the future, it is also it's coming up that the services will be much more affordable and customized for the masses. So, today if I want to use a satellite not as a, co-founder of Astrome, but actually as a citizen, if I want to use the satellites, I should have a means to buy that capacity and do whatever customized application I have. So that is something that is coming up in the future. And lastly, there are also a lot of private companies that are entering the arena. So throughout my presentation, we will talk about, how are these changes coming up and why now. So if you look at, I mentioned in the previous slide that, we are going from broadcasting satellites, majority of the satellites being broadcasting satellites, to internet satellites. Now it is important to understand how the internet works. Basically, all of us who are the consumers of internet usually see this layer of internet, which is tier 3, where we get our internet through cell phone towers. So we get our internet on phones, 4G, 3G, and we also get fiber optic connections at our homes, for broadband internet. But the second layer, which is basically the tier 2 layer, is something that connects our local internet network to a continent level. So let's say in India there is Bangalore, there is Mumbai, and everything in between. So all of these local networks are connected by an infrastructure, which is the tier 2 internet infrastructure. And then comes the tier 1, which actually connects continents. So, and that part is mainly dominated by submarine cable, where you have submarine cable running from one continent to another. So this is kind of how the internet architecture looks today. And different companies, different players are operational in each of these tiers. For example, in India, tier 3 player would be somebody like ACT Broadband, or smaller local internet providers. Tier 2 and tier 3 would be most of the telecom companies that we have in India, including BSNL, Airtel, Vodafone. And some of them also transcend to tier 1 capacity. So for example, companies like Airtel or Reliance have submarine cables running from one continent to another, or they own that cable. So there is a big shift that is happening where satellite networks are entering the market. So the internet architecture, the whole architecture is changing, where satellites actually transcend all these three at once. Because from satellite, you can actually deliver tier 1 capacity, tier 2 capacity, and also tier 3. What I mean by that is, if I have a satellite network in space, I can actually provide internet connectivity directly to the consumer, to their homes. I can also connect local internet networks to other local internet networks. So that forms a tier 2 capacity. And moreover, if my satellites have interconnected are interconnected, I can also move data from one continent to another. So that's why this is the shift that is happening, where one kind of technology is actually catering to all three tiers of internet. And why is this happening? The reason is because the fiber optic cable infrastructure, which actually dominates tier 2 and tier 3, is very expensive. And for us to actually penetrate the most, rural parts or remote parts is actually very, very cost intensive. Because of that, internet infrastructure has not penetrated well in most of the rural and developing countries. And satellites can do a far better job because they transcend all these three levels at once. So you may ask, why is it that we are talking about satellite internet now? I mean, it's been many, many decades that we have had satellites, we have had communication satellites, we've had great companies who make great communication satellites. Well, there is a very good reason for that. The reason is that the electronics which goes into the satellite, the communication system, has exponentially grown in terms of what capacity it can give. So for example, just to give you a number, the Iridium satellite that came 20 years ago, the total capacity was 2 Mbps, the first version of them. And now we are talking about the satellites of OneWeb, which gives 8 Gbps capacity, which is 4,000 times more capacity. And then we are talking about companies like mine, Astrome, who is increasing that 8 Gbps to 100 Gbps, which basically is a 10-fold increase in, in a matter of 2 or 3 years. So that's why the transponder capacity is actually going, through very fast change. Because of that, the cost of providing satellite internet from space is reducing proportional to, how much capacity you're increasing. Because, mostly the cost of making a satellite, manufacturing a satellite has not changed that much. Of course, in the next few slides, I will show you how the cost changes when you talk about a geostationary satellite versus a LEO satellite. The second reason why we are talking about satellite internet now, or rather so many companies are coming up and trying to build constellations to provide connectivity from space, is also because of the dropping launch cost. And that is majorly because we, government agencies have gotten very good at, more reliable in terms of, what they can do with their rockets. And also because of private players like SpaceX entering the market, who are expected to drop the launch cost by even 5 times, than the current cost. So those are the two reasons why, satellite internet is actually picking up in today's generation, and it's expected to boom in the future. So in the first slide, I also talked about the trend of moving from geostationary orbits to LEO. So let me explain why in the satellite communication industry, why we are moving that way. So of course, geostationary satellites were chosen for a reason. The fact that any satellite put in geostationary orbit is almost stationary to the ground, or it is stationary to the ground, actually reduces the complexity of your communication system quite a bit. Because you are really stationary, you don't have to really care about the movement of the satellite with respect to ground, which is great for broadcasting satellite, but because these are very, very high orbit, satellites, it's not so great for latency, for two-way communication. So now, when we move to LEO satellites, the complexity of the satellite increases, of course, because now we have to take care of, the movement of satellite with respect to Earth. But then what we gain is in terms of network capacity. Let me explain how. So geostationary satellites were also chosen because from geostationary orbits, you can actually look at a large area of Earth. So, as large as, 1/3 of the Earth can be viewed from one satellite in geostationary orbit. But when you come to LEO orbits, you actually are looking at smaller areas, so something like 1,000 kilometers. So just to give you a rough number, India's width is 3,000 kilometers. So we're talking about like 1/3 of India being seen by one satellite. Now, what that does for the capacity is that if you're a geostationary satellite, you have a certain capacity. That capacity is actually distributed over a larger area, which means the capacity that is available at a particular area is less. Now, when you move to LEO satellites, or MEO or LEO, you have the same capacity what you had in GEO actually available to a smaller area. This is something very parallel to what has happened in the telecom industry. So if you guys know, earlier cell phone towers used to cater to anywhere between 2 kilometer to 5 kilometer distance. And that's how we got our 2G connections. Now with 3G, 4G, 5G coming in, the cell size has reduced. And the major reason for that is because we want to provide the same capacity that was earlier distributed over 5 to 10 kilometers into a smaller area, because all of us are using more and more data. So same thing applies to satellites, where now we want satellites to be in LEO so that we can have focused capacity over smaller area, so that all of us can get the bandwidth that we need today. Also, so basically you lose on complexity, but you gain on network capacity. And of course, yeah, I'll just finish in a minute. So basically, these are things that are quite obvious, that when you're in geostationary orbit, you're looking at larger area, you only need 3 satellites to cover the whole Earth. When you come to MEO, the number is between 10 to 50. When you come to LEO, 200 to 2,000 satellites. But interestingly, you actually spend the same amount of money in total, because the LEO satellites are much cheaper. So, overall the cost actually comes out to be the same. But what have you gained? You have gained in terms of network capacity. So that is the reason why we are going to LEO constellations for satellite internet delivery. So I'm going to skip this slide, or rather I'm going to run through it quickly. But basically the technology itself has, as I was saying, has really leapfrogged from C and S band transponders to Ku, Ka band, which are coming up, which gives 8 Gbps, to millimeter wave spectrum, where you can actually get 100 Gbps kind of throughputs. So this is a little bit about Astrome. Our services, internet services, will actually be available in 2020, where we will cover all of the developing countries, including South America, Africa, Australia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, all of the developing country belt, where majority of the population who doesn't have access to broadband internet will have access to internet. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Neha. A wonderful presentation and a technology really to look forward for. My next speaker would be Neel Mehta. He is co-founder and director at Aerospace. Mr. Neel Mehta is responsible for leading product development, focusing on research of new technologies for making innovative products. He also pursues and develops opportunity to collaborate with external technology partners. Prior to founding Asteria, Neel worked for more than 3 years as a system engineer, flight control in Rockwell Collins Incorporation, USA. Neel.
Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. I come from a little bit different background. I'm not from the space industry. I'm from the drone industry, but I'm an aerospace engineer by education, and I've always been interested in space. I think there are parallels between the new space environment which has emerged and the drone market which has also emerged, and I think I'd like to draw parallels between those and talk about the opportunities as well as challenges which new space faces. So I think in general, when we talk about new space, and there are a multitude of forms, suborbital, orbital, or even deep space, the goal is to make access to space cheaper, faster, and better, as well as manage assets in space the same way. So this is, in opposition to kind of old space where things are controlled by governments, they're slow to move, they're humongously expensive, and new space is kind of trying to be more agile, more responsive, and more accepting of risk, which leads to lesser cost. We've seen a number of actors emerge in this environment. I think SpaceX, Planet Labs, those are kind of the poster boys. There are other ones who are coming up. Blue Origin, I'm happy to see companies coming up in India as well. I think in general, there are a few trends and opportunities which is driving this industry, and I think those are very similar to what drives the drone industry as well. The first is demand for data. There is an increasing kind of need for more and more data across a lot of industries, be it agriculture, military definitely, geospatial mapping, energy, which is kind of giving rise to new opportunities in the new space environment. Because data is something that a space asset can provide at scale, and which no other technology right now is able to do. Drones can provide very local access to data, or even regional access to data, but providing data at scale is something that space has to take up. And I think that demand is driving new space opportunities. This is not only in upstream kind of opportunities where you're launching satellites which can provide data, and you're making it easier and cheaper to launch satellites, but also in the downstream opportunities where you're managing the data sets from these satellites, you're analyzing them, providing things like counting cars in a shopping mall, counting containers in a port to get more and more analytics for different industries. And so I think those are big drivers for new space, and there's a lot of opportunities for people to get into new space from that side. Second is, I think, demand for connectivity. And Neha alluded to that very well in her presentation. The ambitions of people like Google, Facebook to provide connectivity over the whole world is kind of giving opportunities for space actors to take up this challenge. Because again, connectivity at scale is something which I think only space assets can provide. People have looked at drones as well and are developing drones to provide regional connectivity. But if you're talking about connectivity at scale, I think this is something that's a great opportunity for new space. Thirdly, I think the important trend or an opportunity which has come up, and this is also very specific to drones as well, is the maturity in technology. And I think people have talked about that. The same kind of technology which has matured along with the smartphone industry, miniaturized electronics, better batteries, communication networks. I think all of those things have given rise to the drone industry as well, and play a big role in making new space opportunities emerge as well. I think what I read, one of the very first prototypes which was made by Planet Labs was essentially hacked together by using a HTC Nexus 1 phone and kind of prototyping it out. So I think that trend is definitely giving rise to those kind of opportunities. And I think fourth is the emergence of low risk opportunities. And this is kind of critical to building a sustainable business in the new space environment. They are enabled by decreasing costs in manufacturing and launch services. It's easy to kind of believe that investments in space companies are too risky, but I think the costs overall, even for someone who wants to build a better and cheaper rocket, has come down significantly from the past, and that has led to kind of emergence of low risk opportunities which people have taken up and are able to get funded as well. And if you're talking about satellites, I think the cost of making satellites and deploying satellites has gone down drastically. Probably it would have cost you $300 million to make a satellite, and you can make the same kind of capability at a much lower cost today. I think those kind of opportunities have really given rise to the new changing space environment, and I think the same kind of holds true for drones as well. But there are a few challenges, and the first one is venture capital funding. I think for any industry to take off, venture capital funding is a big requirement. Not all companies are going to be funded or backed by billionaires like Jeff Bezos, and VC funding is critical, for the growth opportunities of new companies, because they are the only ones who can take on that risk and are able to support startups which are high risk. And I'm very happy to hear about Bidushi's talk, which they're going along in that side and trying to encourage companies to start up by lessening the risk for them. So while VC funding is on the rise, as Bidushi pointed out, about more than $2 billion annually, most of these funding opportunities are in the US or the UK. I think about 75 to 80% would be in the US, and I think that's a challenge in terms of availability of such funding in emerging markets like Asia, which is a challenge for the new space actors. And the second challenge, I think, is very similar to what we face in the drone industry as well, which is the regulatory environment. I think doing business in space means that at some level you are going to do business with the government. And for a lot of the activities which are opening up new markets like asteroid mining or cleaning up space debris, there's not a regulatory framework in place, and the legislation is going to be evolving as your business model evolves. And if that does not keep pace with your business, then it can, make or break your business. So I think those are very critical challenges which we need to address to make the new space economy take off. And I guess in ending, I'd just like to talk about one thing which could be an opportunity as well as a challenge. Usually when we talk about new space, it's talked about in opposition to what old space is. It's not controlled by governments, it's not slow to move, it's not very expensive. But I think probably the correct way to think about it, and I had a good analogy which I read about, and I think Tom alluded to that in his talk, is to think of the relationship as parents versus kids. New space are the kids who have big dreams, who want to chart their own path, and but that is not possible without the support and the platform which old space has already developed and the infrastructure which they already have in place. I think without old space, essentially new space would not exist. And so for that to happen, so for new space to really succeed, I think two things have to happen. First is the kids must take full advantage of the platform that the parents have provided. And I think secondly, the parents must in every way support the dreams and ambitions of the kids. So I think those are the two kind of opportunities as well as challenges which we have. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Neel. It was, really interesting to see, and we all know that, for remote sensing particularly, how much use we have for drones, and I'm sure the house has a lot of questions for you. And we come to our last speaker, Alok Anil, who is the director of Next Big Group. And with Elon Musk saying that, the colony on Mars is going to be built by a 3D printer, Mr. Alok Anil's stint with the 3D printing started in 2008 as he was looking for custom-fit rocket parts for the university rocket project team. It was funded by GE. He has utilized the power of 3D printing to manufacture complex aerospace and automotive prototypes for research purposes. He has previously published his work at DRDO conference. Alok is now working towards bringing his expertise in the field of 3D printing and manufacturing to help Next Big Innovation Labs develop India's first commercial 3D bioprinter. Alok is a member of World Economic Forum, 3D Printing Expert Network, and Global Shaper Community, and is actively involved in missions to bring new age technology adoption into the healthcare and aerospace sector. Alok.
Thank you. So in the interest of time and to keep you all less hungry, I will keep my presentation quite short. So before we start talking about the changing space landscapes, so I'd like to briefly dwell upon the fact that today everyone is aware that we are entering a new age where the fourth industrial revolution is upon us, the era of the fourth industrial revolution. And we see how technology is playing a key role in our day-to-day lives. There's a lot of transformation happening, and we quickly need to adopt to the use of technology in our day-to-day lives so as to kind of sustain and move ahead. And moving on. So with regards to just a short example as to what one of my fellow panelist Bidushi mentioned. So it's about technology today that can look at creating inclusive growth in our communities. Just look at the example of the space blanket being used to keep a refugee warm in a cold winter in maybe Europe or when they're crossing oceans. So that's the power technology plays, and it's our responsibility to kind of ensure that the bridge is created to bring innovative technology to the right people. So moving on. So my talk is primarily today focused on three main things. It's around 3D printing and how 3D printing is a powerful tool and how it's already being used in the process of creating low-cost rockets and also reusable rockets. And now again, reusable rockets and other technologies around that are empowering us to go out there and look, and us as explorers, humans being explorers, starting with Columbus, we love exploring the world. Now we're going to go explore the galaxy out there. So how reusable rockets is again empowering us to go out there, look at asteroids, and then how that's again a base for us to go explore deep space. So these three things are quite interlinked, and I'll quickly run you all through the work which is happening. But before that, a short background, as mentioned by my panelists when he introduced me. So I come from an aerospace background, so I've worked with 3D printing in the space of automotive and aerospace. And ideally right now, along with a team of biotechnologists, scientists, and engineers, we're working towards developing India's first 3D bioprinter, which is already ready and it's undergoing certain validation. So the power we see in the technology is the fact that 3D printing by itself is not just limited to any specific field. Ideally, it's very cross-functional. And today, the bioprinter we're talking about has a lot of applications when you look at something as powerful as it being on the International Space Station, for example. That could drive research in a very different way than how current researchers are doing research. So as of now, our technology is aimed at kind of powering and empowering researchers on planet Earth. But in the future, with the help of the community here, we'd like to look at how it can empower humans as we start looking at setting up another civilization out there. So moving on. So here we are, this the bottom of the slide, planet Earth. We have SpaceX, who have already been using 3D printed rocket nozzles since about 2014. They're super Draco engines, which ideally is used as, which ideally the engine casing you see there is completely 3D printed. And the advantage you see here is the fact that new age companies that are coming up are definitely operating at lower budgets than governments used to. And again, when it comes with, when innovation is at the forefront of your organization, you need certain tools to kind of help you kind of put products out there. So that way, traditional manufacturing is never really the answer. And with 3D printing, what Elon Musk and his company have been able to do is look at a unique kind of a cooling system to this engine, and also look at how they can incorporate Inconel super alloy to kind of look at how they can basically create a much more a high strength to weight material, which again, as the discussion is happening today, is helping bring down the launch costs, which is very critical today as we all talk about. And also more importantly, that particular engine that they initially worked on was from design to first rocket firing within 3 months. So that's the power, like, as innovation is happening, we quickly need to adopt and go to market. And space has always been a sector where there's a very long wait from when innovation's happening. And I think in the previous panel, someone was talking about, or maybe it was Bidushi that was talking about how in R&D we take too long to come up with products to market, and eventually technology gets old. So this is ideally powering people to kind of bring products to market quickly. And moving on to the International Space Station up there, 400 kilometers above us. So we have Made in Space with a printer that's actually empowering astronauts today to print tools. And in the future, this could be, again, a launch platform. We spoke about how CubeSats cost about $250,000 to $300,000 to launch. So think of the cost coming down exponentially to a magnitude of about 50 to 60x lower, and still being profitable when you're printing it out there in the International Space Station and launching it out. So the technology today exists. It's a matter of us adopting, and it's a matter of the government adopting, it's a matter of the industry adopting and seeing value to it and giving a push. So 2 instances here I'd like to point out is, on the left you have the testing going on of, again, the Super Draco engines. So here it's SpaceX, so it's their kind of intent to look at sending a crew mission to maybe the moon and beyond to Mars. So ideally what the challenge they gave them is, you have to look at a redundant system where the crew will remain safe. So after all the instances where we've lost brave astronauts, so now there's a lot of redundancy and there's a lot of importance towards protecting lives on board. So here they've developed a unique launch abort system, which typically during launch, if the rocket misfires or whatever it may be, the launch abort system can go away. And I'll just go back to the previous slide. So you can see on the right there, that's the launch abort system. So in case there's an emergency, the launch abort system can separate out and the crew can land safe. So those engines there are powered right now with 3D printers. And again, high strength to weight ratio, 3D printers which have been kind of the complete engine has been certified, and they're using high super performance alloys made of Inconel, and which again, 3D printing gives them the ability to design very uniquely, not just the outer structure, but even the internal structure to an extent where they can control the entire thermodynamics around what's going on inside. And even, yeah, the fact that the most important thing is the quick ideation to product, which is happening within a very short span. And on the right you have there is a small company, I mean, not quite a small company right now, but working out of a very small nation in the Far East right now for us, New Zealand. You have Rocket Labs. They've been using a lot of parts in their 3D printed engine, starting from just the 3D printed engine component, the fuel injectors, the pumps, all of them are 3D printed. So right now, they classify as having the most 3D printed components in a particular rocket engine. And they've performed about 500 test fires, which amounts to almost about 5 hours of testing. And ideally, that proves that the technology is already ready to kind of replace traditional manufacturing in a critical segment like this. Sorry. Yeah. So moving on, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about mining asteroids right now. So this is a brief infographic that Planetary Resources has put forward. So ideally, what are we looking at here? So as we look at exploring and going into deep space, we really need to find resources and pit stops along the way. And asteroids and comets are these pit stops for us to kind of stop there, refuel, get access to a lot of resources we need to continue our journey into deep space. So this really is happening. There's quite a number of private players right now who are looking at this as a very viable option, primarily because, yes, there's a lot of money sitting within these asteroids, and that I'll get to in the next slide. And also, more importantly, the water component there is of critical importance when you look at it as a fuel to kind of start moving beyond planet Earth. So here's why there's a lot of interest in the asteroid mining right now. There's about 16,000 near-Earth asteroids which are really rich in resources. And when I say rich, think of it as rich as 10,000 quadrillion. So NASA is currently exploring a mission. They want to send it out by 2022, and it will land on an asteroid, which is codenamed 16 Psyche. And the value of that asteroid, they claim to be $10,000 quadrillion. Today, the global economy of the world is 78 trillion. So are we in a rush to make the next killing in terms of seeing who has most money? I don't know. The race is on to go get there first, and there's a couple of private players in the run. So more importantly, I mean, for us as space enthusiasts, rather than just looking at it from the money perspective, it's really important because you have certain precious metals out there which of course could fund expensive space operations, which you could send back to India and or the rest of the world, wherever the mission's starting from, and fund your space operations. And secondly, the structural metals which are found on these asteroids. So as we start moving from point A to point B, maybe there's some structural failures in certain parts. So think of having a 3D printer on the rocket there, and with access to your certain materials which are available in powdered raw format, you would be able to create replacement structural parts to continue your journey, so your mission does not get abruptly ended. So that's the power that kind of technology can add to kind of increasing the longevity of the mission. And again, the primarily most important thing that we always take for granted today is the fact that Cape Town's suffering from a water shortage. Maybe Bangalore, they say, is also on the verge of it. Water is starting to kind of feel very important for us here, at least clean drinking water. But when you go into space, water is important for three main things. One, you need it for your own survival. You need it as a form of creating fuel to kind of power your mission. And three, again, that's the base component towards growing food or whatever to keep a crew mission kind of healthy and living. And again, so 2 trillion, they assume there's a lot of water out there. So who knows, maybe the next war will be fought over water, and people are just hunting for asteroids to just say, I want to go find the asteroid which has the most amount of water. So yes, so ideally, so these three things why I wanted to point out is the fact that one, this is our kind of way to kind of look into deep space explorations, and one, this is our chance to kind of look at human civilizations beyond planet Earth. And for all of this, why I'm pointing out all of this is the fact that because I believe truly the fact that 3D printing technology has a key role to play. When you look at habitats on Mars and on the moon, you have raw materials which are in the form of powdered metal. And today this technology which is direct metal laser sintering, which has the base component as a powdered metal, and you have a heavy high intensity laser. This laser is fusing these products together to create an end product. And as the technology gets better, as the technology gets faster, as technology gets more autonomous, so today we're able to control 3D printers autonomously over just a small Arduino and Raspberry Pi. So think of those kind of instances where tomorrow you just have a base station here and you're just controlling kind of how manufacturing is done out there, and then the mission just continues autonomously even without having a living being on the rocket. So this is something I wanted to point out to you. So with regards to space, I have noticed that the fact that we always look up to the West and say, okay, what's really happening in the West? But today the world is fast changing. There is a company out there in China which is 6 people, average age of about 22, 23-year-old kids who are experimenting with reusable rockets. And that's a recent video from about a month or so ago of them testing their reusable rockets, which are, the most important aspect again is the hovering time, and as you can see, the stability and stuff is what they're testing there. So it's great that Elon Musk and the others out there, Jeff Bezos, are proving to the world that things can change, but it's also important for us to look into differently to different countries. Today, technology is just putting technology in the right hands, as you can see, really means that you don't have to be the billionaire as they predicted in the past to have a space company and to really be innovative. It's about the right technology in the right minds, and with the right support from the ecosystem can really change the way innovation is done. And that's really been proven by what Rocket Labs is doing, what Link Space is doing. So all of this is a great sign. The fact that the new space is going to be driven by new age individuals who really can dream big, and these are kind of mentorship stories that they can kind of look up to and as they grow in this sector. Thank you.
So thank you, Alok. You have nicely connected 3D printing to space exploration, finding water, and also to the quadrillion-dollar economy. It was a wonderful presentation. We have found some time, and before I open the house for questions to my panelists, I would like to know that what are the challenges exactly in terms of manufacturing, finding parts which have been discussed, and what are the possibilities of right now in India finding money, and also how does the ecosystem here in terms of permissions and laws support you while you are doing a startup? So anyone?
So we do a lot of product development in-house. We build all of our drones, for example, in-house. Definitely there's not a lot of ecosystem in India that supports developing products, and sometimes we have to depend on sources outside of India. So I'll give you an example. Even small screws that have very thin heads are things that we have to import from outside of India to build our products. But I think that's something that if you are in India, that's something that you are expected to do. It's how you can build a sustainable business, and I think that's probably where you need to focus on. So I think the product ecosystem will only develop once there are a few success stories coming out of India, and we are seeing some of that trend happening, but I think there's definitely a lot more that can be done.
I think that the challenge of actually building in-country is quite real, and one of the things we're looking at doing is putting something like what Tom Siegert has, a local satellite production facility, but the whole supply chain is the issue, right? So you can do individual components, but if you're still having to go overseas and you've got those import tariffs, you're still going to be behind. So it's going to require a cultural shift, really, and just a building of an entire space infrastructure in terms of manufacturing.
I'll just try to stress on since the work I'm doing is with 3D printing. So I believe the challenge we see there is the technology is much more evolved. The regulation is not yet to catch up. So the challenge I see there in specific to the aerospace sector is, for example, there is no clear methodology or body which kind of says, okay, is this part flyworthiness part, for example. The flyworthiness today, the tests, and the fact that 3D printing can replace a lot of functional parts out there, but there's no kind of body which is coming in there and replacing it. GE, for example, has heavily invested into their additive manufacturing wing, and they're using a lot of parts on their LEAP engine, which are currently 3D printed, and they have an internal system which kind of gets these parts the flyworthiness rating. So that way, I feel the industry has a long way to go, and it's more on the lines of today. I don't blame the regulators because technology is changing so fast that maybe they don't really are up to pace with it. So it's really important that there's new age thinking and new age individuals who understand this technology, who are in these regulatory boards, and that they can drive the discussions in our favor.
Now we'll take few questions. We have some time left. Yes, there's your hand there, and around 5 questions I think would be what we can take. So here's the first one. Yeah, please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Sure, I'm Srinath from Agnikul. It's a launch vehicle startup. Question for Neha and Neel actually. So in terms of communication from somewhere at some altitude, satellites versus drones, which do you think will pick up? Because we see both initiatives going on. So just wanted to get both your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So I'll take that first. Actually, if you remember on my presentation, I had tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. According to me, the drones fall in the tier 3, which is, connecting the local internet infrastructure to the consumer. I think, but that is not solving the complete problem. And that's why I think satellites are better, because they solve all of the problems on every level. The second thing is, if you look at drones, the footprint of the drone is very, very low. And the lifetime, no matter if you design a solar UAV, it's going to last you, 8 months. But then I don't think that's enough, because of, you're going to need a whole lot of them, and you're going to have to keep replacing them. I think satellites are a better option. That's what I think.
Yeah, I'll elaborate on that from a drone's perspective. So I think there's a reason why people are looking at both options, because at the moment I don't think there's a clear answer. There are definitely cases where drones can provide capabilities which are difficult to do with satellites. For example, you could have a high altitude drone which is flying for a very long time, let's say a year or so. That means that you can get it back within a year, change the payload according to the new tech, and send it up again. Whether the cost of that will be more than launching small satellites, that's something I think would be seen. But there are some I think interesting capabilities which drones offer for regional connectivity, and obviously you're closer to the Earth, so you have better bandwidths for regional connectivity, which probably is a compelling case why people have started looking at it. I think Facebook, Airbus are the two big ones who have started prototyping these drones. I think 14 days is about the time which right now they've achieved with a solar powered drone. I think they want to extend it initially for 3 months and then maybe longer than that.
We'll take the question there, the gentleman, please.
Mine? No, I just wanted to make a comment that if airspace was not sovereign, my name is Siddhartha, if airspace was not sovereign territory, the LEO market wouldn't exist.
Yeah, right, yes. After this.
Yeah, hi, I'm Moin. I'm from Agnikul as well. So I have my question for Alok. So why is it not transparent market for 3D metal printing? And in terms of pricing, I just want to know, how do you think it is going to change? Because as startups, that's what we require. So there's no transparent market for 3D metal printing yet. And you were talking about the Inconel and all the other stuff. So can you just elaborate on that?
What do you mean by there's no transparent market?
Yeah, because the pricing is almost thrice as far as we are concerned. So there is no specific market segment that where we can easily achieve. So I just want to know how the pricing is going to change the aspect for the startups to look into it, because 3D, for a normal conventional 3D printing, it is available. So we know there are various printers. But for 3D metal printing, there are not many companies that are actually doing it. So in terms of that, how do you think the metal pricing is going to change?
Sure. So I'll give you a tip. So next time you're negotiating with them, the cost price of Inconel is not more than about $100 a kg. So you know what you're negotiating for. But again, all that aside, if you look at it, typically there's not a lot of people doing 3D printing, right? And the ones who have 3D printers have invested a couple of million to start with. Then they invest in getting the certifications right. Then they, if aerospace is not the only sector they're focusing on, if they want to look at anything with metal thing, they have to get certain ISO regulations like 13485, right? Then they have to get a clean room and all of these facilities in for that. Then it takes them a 1.5 year time to get those regulations in space. So it's inventory which is just sitting in there, and they've invested in the cost. So for them, again, end of the day, if you give them the certain volumes and if you give them a certain part, and the cost of running these machines is very expensive. So that way it all gets added up. There's an initial upfront cost they want to recover, and unless they see volumes, the cost will not come down. So it's not about the technology being expensive, it's the fact that since there's not enough adoption, it will always be expensive. And just another example is the fact that now there's another company, if you look up, called Desktop Metal. So they're trying to change that game. So metal printing has always been about large-scale machines, but Desktop Metal is trying to make like a $20,000, $30,000 machine. And it's heavily been invested by companies like GE and even your BMW, because everyone's looking at that as the future to kind of replace parts.
Exactly, that's my point. I just want to understand for startups, how is it going to be beneficial? Right?
No, there are a couple of places you can go to. I mean, government-funded institutes, if they're ready to open up their facilities to you, then maybe you can get it at a subsidized price. But again, there are a few places in India which have access to these DMLS machines, but it's not always that they open it up beyond the organization or their research groups. So, yes.
I just want to add to that question. Are you doing 3D metal printing at this moment?
We're working with partners, yes. My company specifically focused on the soft tissues bioprinting side, but we're working with partners.
Hello, I'm Divyanshu from Rocketeers. I have two questions, one for you, Neha. You highlighted that while we move from GEO to LEO, the approximate cost remains the same because you have to put up more satellites. So even though individually satellites are cheaper, but overall you're spending more. You get more network at the cost of complexity. And also you compared it with the internet architecture that is there, the 3-tier thing being replaced by satellite networks. What I wanted to ask was that both GEO and the current architecture, the infrastructure has a long lifespan, whereas LEO satellites tend to have a much shorter lifespan. And wouldn't that really push infrastructure costs to a much higher level over a period of time? And I have one more question for Bidushi. So you've been talking about Make in India and how a lot of startups, we need to improve the ecosystem in India, we need people, not just startups, but other players as well, big and small, to come and start making space infrastructure related, upstream related hardware in India. I wanted to understand that how this infrastructure or this hardware can, how is the import-export of this control? And if a company is building in India, how difficult is it for them to launch somewhere else? Because as we see that launching from India tends to be an issue for people who are building in India. So,
yeah, so I'll go for the first question. So when I say that the cost is comparable, I have also taken into account that a LEO satellite is operational for 5 years versus a GEO satellite, 25 years. So, but also it is important to understand that the kind of throughputs that GEO satellites are bringing in. So for example, if you have a, if you talk about companies like Viasat, each satellite, they want to give 1 Tbps capacity. Overall, 3 satellites, total capacity is 3 Tbps. Versus, let's say, constellation that Astrome has, 200 satellites, each satellite giving 100 Gbps. The capacities that we are talking about is it's actually 20 Tbps. So if you compare constellation with respect to per Mbps cost, infrastructure cost per Mbps, because of the high capacity that LEO satellites can bring in, you win always, in terms of per Mbps cost. Yes, so you can divide it by the number of years, and you're still in a good economic sense.
Okay, so you're asking about import and export. I'm not an expert on the regulations, but what I would like to suggest is just a shift in mindset. I don't think that we can focus on Make in India as much as Make it global. And that's part of the reason we're doing what we're doing. I have an American passport, a British passport, and an OCI card. So to me, this really is a global effort. And for our CubeSats, for example, that we use in our courses, we built them in Singapore using parts from China. And we bring them here to India to use them. And in the longer run, that is an expensive sort of effort, but at the moment it works, right? So I can't tell you specifically what will happen to get the regulations moving, but I think that's part of why we're here. And what was the second part of your question? Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we'll take the last question or a comment from the, yeah.
Subject to Indian export control and MTCR regulations. That's the net point on the whole question of import, export, and globalization. However, for the purposes of those who might be interested in this area, advice would be that you don't over-specify the component, but make sure that it is just below the threshold specified in the MTCR regulations, which are available on the net. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful comment. And just summing up what we discussed here, the space belongs to everyone, and it is the final frontier for humankind. Rightly put by Dr. Pillai, just his keynote address today, and nicely put forward by this panel that what new space is looking at, what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities, wonderful work in education going on to sort of do the capacity building and involve younger children into getting in more imagination and thinking of new projects. Nice work of drone going on, and new possibilities, technologies, and integration with the various technologies of space and drone coming up, and a wonderful concept of having internet through satellite, where all the 3-tier are just done by a single entity, and then 3D printing, which obviously seems to be the future of our manufacturing and also to the answer to many problems that we are facing right now. With these words, I would like to thank my panel for a wonderful discussion. Thank you. Thanks a lot.